this year the daffodils in the garden have done really well, and they seem to have flowered for weeks and weeks. And in most cases you can just let them die down and they'll come back again next year. But there are a few things that we can do as gardeners to ensure that next year's flower are just as good as this year or even better. The thing we've got to remember is daffodils have got to die down to build the bulb up in the soil. Flowering takes a lot out of the flowers here to build up and strengthen it. So the first thing we can do is, when the flowers start to go over, is to take off all the old flower heads. If we don't, the daffodil will produce a seed pod at the back of the flower. That uses a lot of energy, so we want all the energy that would have gone into seed to go back down into the bulb. So it's just a case of walking around the garden with a bucket, snapping off all the old flower heads. They can go on the compost heap. We then let the foliage die down naturally, because the food that's been stored in the leaf will go back down to the roots and to build up the bulb. And the rule of thumb is we normally leave them for 6 weeks after they've flowered to build up the bulb. But to get plenty of energy into the plant, the other thing we can do is feed them. And this is just a granular fertiliser. You can use a liquid one if you want, but this is dried poultry manure. And all we're doing is sprinkling a few handfuls of this around each clump of daffodils. And when it rains, that will dissolve and go down and feed the plant. One thing that you should never do, and I hate to see it, is where people get the leaves of the daffodils and they tie them in knots to tidy up the garden. Not only does it look horrible, but by tying them in knots it reduces the leaf area that's exposed to the sun, and that stops the plants making food. So leave them as they are for 6 weeks to die down. That way you should get really good flowers next year. Now if you've got an established clump of daffodils in your garden that suddenly stops flowering, then that's possibly because the bulbs are very close together, they're overcrowded. For a daffodil to flower, in indeed any bulb, the bulb has to be a certain size. And if it can't grow to that size, then the flower won't form. And this was a clump of daffodils in my garden that stopped flowering for no apparent reason. And when I've dug them up, I can see it's because lots of the bulbs are very small. They're not, because they're close together, they haven't got the room to expand. So if you've got that situation in your garden, all you need to do is at this time of the year to dig up the whole clump, divide the bulbs into 3s or 4s, and then plant them back in the garden, making sure that they go in to the depth that they were before. And we can see where the white stem is, that was under the soil. Plant them back in the garden to give them more space to grow. Let them die down again for 6 weeks, and then next year when they grow, hopefully these will have swollen to a size where you'll get some wonderful flowers.